Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Good, great.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I now call the University Senate to order. With this being my first official University Senate meeting as president, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your leadership, your support, and for your commitment to shared governance. The University of Minnesota has one of the strongest and most active shared governance systems in higher ed. And as president, I look forward to working with you and your colleagues to uphold shared governance as a core value. Item number 2 is the senator orientation, and I'll turn it over to Lori Cooper-Stoll, Director of the University Senate Office, to present this topic.
Thank you, President Cunningham. I'm going to be presenting this topic along with a colleague in the Senate office, our Senior Senate Associate, Amber Bathke, and she's going to get us started, and then I'll pick it up.
I'm not hearing anything.
Thank you for that. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. The purpose of this orientation is to provide an overview of the University Senate governance structure and how it works, with special attention to the role and functioning of the university and faculty senates. We hope that this will help members understand where they fit into the broader system and how contributing to Senate work can help affect change at the university. Shared governance is based on the core idea that administrators, faculty, staff, and students have important roles to play in setting university policy and making key decisions. Governance also gives voice, though not necessarily ultimate authority, to all constituencies, helping those who do make decisions make them more wisely. So first, it's helpful to understand the overall structure of University Senate governance. The University Senate, which is meeting presently, is the umbrella body comprising representatives from all 4 of the other senates: faculty, student, P&A, and civil service, which are represented by gold circles on this slide. It's important to note that the other senates do not report to the University Senate, but rather all 5 senates have direct lines to the administration. The University Senate meets about 7 times per year, and each of the constituent senate also holds separate meetings. Each senate also has a consultative committee, represented by the white circles on the diagram. The consultative committees are charged with steering and executive duties for the Senate, including setting agendas, serving as a deliberative body for the Senate, and, if needed, acting on behalf of the Senate under certain circumstances. All of the other committees that are not consultative committees report up to one of the senates through its consultative committee. And you can see the list of all of those committees on this slide. The ones that you see in parentheses are there because they have a secondary reporting line. So as you can see, the Educational Policy Committee, for example, reports directly to the Faculty Senate, but also has a reporting line to the University Senate and the Student Senate, because educational policy has wide-ranging effects across the university. So shared governance is defined as a system that allows constituent groups to be actively involved in the development of policies and decision-making that affect the institution. A well-functioning shared governance structure relies on trust and productive relationships between governance, the administration, and the broader university community. The University Senate Office emphasizes collaboration and consultation between these groups, as well as collaboration within the governance structure, such as between senates and committees and with the Senate office. University Senate governance includes non-unionized faculty and staff and students from all 5 campuses and extension in both senates and committees. We recognize diversity as a strength and strive for committees and senates that represent the diversity of the university community. University Senate is advisory to the administration. This means that the power of shared governance lies mainly in its ability to influence, which I will talk a little bit more in upcoming slides. So Senate's responsibilities in the Constitution, it's spelled out that the Senates have general legislative authority over all matters that affect the university as a whole. So that means not specific campuses, not specific colleges, but something that affects more than one campus at least of the university. The University Senate may also offer advice to the president on budget, educational policy, research, etc. The Faculty Senate's authority includes primary responsibility for educational and research policies, advising the president on the university's budget, accreditation, policies concerning faculty appointment and tenure, etc. However, as mentioned earlier, most recommendations that the Senates make are advisory. The administration is not required to follow them. And that's why a good working relationship and consultation is so important. Also, the Senates are very large bodies, as you may have noticed, and they meet relatively infrequently. Therefore, the Senates are often the last stop for initiatives and actions that come through, meaning they provide input and approve, but usually don't get into nitty-gritty details of policy changes, initiatives, and legislative action. This type of work is generally accomplished in committee, which meet more frequently and are smaller groups to allow for a little bit more detailed discussion. So this slide shows the different ways that shared governance can affect change and influence decision-making. The first, best, and primary way is through advising and making recommendations to the administration. This often happens through consultation or informal dialogue at committee or Senate meetings, and often goes overlooked because there isn't any fanfare around it. There really isn't any documentation, really, even except for the minutes. So often administrators will visit committees or senates to talk about a specific issue and seek feedback. And in the course of these conversations, often people will suggest ideas that will simply be implemented because they are a good idea and they're feasible. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes committees or senates may disagree with the administration about what's a good idea or what's feasible. Sometimes things just simply aren't as easily done as one might hope. And so other ways that governance bodies have influence is through legislative action, which I realize now that I skipped policy changes. So I'm going to go back one bullet point just for a second. So policy consultation. Policies undergo comprehensive review on a regular cycle of about 4 years, and many committees have established and documented roles to play in the review cycle. Some of these policies make it to the Senate for a vote, and some only require consultation in committee and then to go to the Senate for information. So you'll see those two different types of policies come to the Senates. These requirements are codified in the Senate review matrix, which is housed.
Tell me something and try it.
Pardon?
Which one you want to try? Can you hear me?
We're in the middle of the presentation. If you're not talking, please mute.
These requirements are codified in the Senate review matrix, which is housed on the policy program's website. For example, most educational policies must be approved by the Educational Policy Committee and the Faculty Consultative Committee and the Faculty Senate. And the policies on discrimination, equity and access, and sexual misconduct must be reviewed by the the Equity, Access, and Diversity Committee. So those are just a couple of examples of where shared governance is required to be involved in policy changes. And these bodies are also consulted when policies undergo major revisions outside of the normal review cycle, which happens with some frequency for a variety of reasons. So now to go back to legislative action, which I kind of jumped the gun to talk about a little bit. So there's 3 types of actions a committee or usually a committee can take when it would like to make its opinions heard in a more formal manner. Senates can make use of these as well, but for the reasons I mentioned earlier, things originate in committee just because it's easier to come up with a resolution or statement or letter in a smaller group and bring it to a larger group for approval. So the 3 types are a letter, a statement, and a resolution. All of these actions will end up at the appropriate Senate, either for information or for a vote. Votes are usually only in the case of resolutions. If individuals would like to bring an action to the Senate, that's also possible and it has happened. However, we do suggest starting with committees in order to benefit from the detailed discussion and consultation that committee work affords. But all of these will end up at a Senate and at some point if they go through committee. So just to give you an idea of some of the resources that we have available, this slide shows screenshots from the University Senate office's resources page, which is the one above, the higher up rectangle. So there's information on how to write a statement, how to write a resolution. There's a submission form for getting a legislative action started. And that URL is usenate.umn.edu/resources. And then linked from our homepage, which is usenate.umn.edu, is what we call our legislative action tracker. So this is a picture of last year's tracker, because this year's is blank so far, but by the end of the year, there will be many, I'm sure, just like last year's, but this shows resolutions, letters, statements, and there will be a link to the document or the action in question. There will be the consultation plan, which is the committees and senates that Senate staff and leadership have recommended that the action be consulted with, as well as places where the committee or the person who's bringing the action through would like to be consulted. So that's where we keep track of what date that meeting occurs, whether it's been complete, any notes, etc. So meeting logistics, I won't go into this in too much detail because you've already kind of seen it in action. But just to make things clear, these meetings have already been added to your Google Calendars. You may have noticed that I also linked the agenda to the calendar invite when I sent it out by email. Ideally, I send it out by email about a week before the meeting, but as you noticed, this time it was, I think, on Friday, so not quite a week. Sometimes it's sooner, sometimes it's later, but 1 week is the ideal. There is a form to fill out for sending an alternate, and many people made use of that today, so we have some alternates here today. It's linked to the docket email that goes out. I do ask that you forward the docket to your alternate if possible, but I will also add them to the Google Calendar invite, so they will get the docket when it's linked to the invite. It's just sometimes I don't get around to adding people until closer to the meeting, and so in order for people to have time to review it, it's best if their senator can forward it to them. In the meeting, the protocols that we use are that everyone is muted and has their video turned off by default. We ask that you remain that way until and unless you are recognized to speak, and then please unmute yourself and turn on your video. Chat is disabled, usually except to co-host, but I was having some trouble with that technicality today, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on right now. I think it's disabled for everyone. But anyway, chat should not be used because we have the speaking order, and using the chat kind of circumvents that. If you need to raise a point of order, however, you can unmute and do that. We'll go over the discussion protocols later in the meeting when we have an actual discussion, so I won't go into them here. And there's just a couple notes on parliamentary procedure. The Senate meetings follow procedures laid out in its constitution, bylaws, and rules. Motions, voting, and other procedures follow Robert's Rules of Order. Motions are typically listed in the docket and as such do not require a second from the floor. A quorum of 50% plus one of all seated members must be present for the body to conduct business, and motions require a simple majority to pass, unless otherwise noted in the docket. Finally, in order to make the most of our limited meeting time, we ask that senators familiarize themselves with the docket materials in advance as much as possible and come especially prepared for any votes that might occur. During discussion, it's helpful to remember that shared governance can be messy and complex, and that reasonable people may disagree, and to assume positive intentions of all participants. Please address all remarks through the chair. rather than directly to other senators or other speakers, and maintain focus on the topic at hand. Speakers are limited to 2 minutes each time they are recognized, and the clerk will keep time and interject when there are 30 seconds remaining and when time is up. Speaking of the clerk, let me take a minute to introduce the officers and leadership of the University and Senate and Faculty Senate to you. First, as you probably knew or figured out by now, the president of the university is chair of the University and Faculty Senates. So we're happy to have President Rebecca Cunningham here chairing the meeting. Professor Rachna Shah from the Carlson School of Management serves as the vice chair and chairs meetings when the president is unable to do so. Professor Ned Patterson from the College of Veterinary Medicine serves as the clerk. And so he will be the person interjecting if people are speaking longer than their 2 minutes. And Nancy Sims of the University Library serves as our parliamentarian. Professors Jennifer Goodnow of the Division of Maths and Sciences at the Morris campus and Professor Perry Leo of the College of Science and Engineering on the Twin Cities campus are the chair and vice chair of the Senate and Faculty Consultative Committees. In their role as leadership of the steering committees of the Senates, they're also part of the leadership team. And next, I will turn it over to Lori to talk a little bit about the Senate office.
Thank you, Amber. So as I said earlier, I am Lori Cooper Stoll. If I have not had the pleasure to meet you, I joined the Senate office in late June. I come to you from the University of Wisconsin system, where I served as a sociology faculty member for 13 years. I have also served as an executive director and in public office for 6 years. It's a pleasure to be with you and helping to support the work of shared governance this year. I'll just take a couple of moments to talk a little bit about the Senate office. As you are aware, there is a very rich tradition of a long history of shared governance in the University of Minnesota system. The importance of the work of shared governance, I believe, is reflected in the fact that we have a team to support the ongoing work of shared governance. For those who are not as quite familiar with our office, our mission statement is as follows: to facilitate the successful operation of the governance system at the University of Minnesota by providing professional support and guidance to University Senate governance bodies and their constituent committees. Next slide, please. And this is our team, and there's no doubt that you are already familiar with Amber, but there are other folks that are also behind the scenes working to help support University and Faculty Senate. You can see them here. Next slide, please. So just to give you a quick, some context for the work that we do in the office as far as scope, our team works with 5 Senates, 5 consultative committees, 22 committees, and six standing subcommittees. Lots of great work to be supporting and guiding. So what is our role? Essentially, it's encapsulated in these 4 points. We advise and guide on Senate practices and processes. We provide continuity for year to year. We serve as liaisons between committees and senates and provide support for committee and Senate meetings. And I think the next slide may be maybe Q&A. So I will, if there are any questions for Amber and I, we will entertain them at this time.
Seeing no questions, we'll move on to item number 3. Item number 3 concerns the administrative responses to University Senate actions and is presented for information. Item number 4 is a list of recent faculty, staff, and student deaths that have been sent for announcement to the Senate. I invite you to observe a moment of silence while I read the names. Shirley Baher, Richard Belfley, Leslie Berry, Anne Burkhart, Martin Chariot, Eric Coleman, Janine Delage, Margaret Gardner, Eileen Harwood, David R. Johnson, Marlene Keller, York Marerins, Michael Marertic, Maddie Robinson, Gloria Williams, Donald Weiss, Janine Ahmed, Victor Bedros, Diana Davies, Henry Kajuk, and Elijah James Major. Item number 5 is an approval of minutes from the University Senate meeting on April 25th, 2024. Amber, please initiate the poll.
Ten more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 121 ayes and 0 nays, that motion carries.
Thank you. Item number 6 is my president's report. With this being my first fall semester here at the University of Minnesota, I'm just thrilled to see the extraordinary energy and enthusiasm emanating across our 5 campuses. Over these past few weeks, my first weeks, we welcomed more than 10,000 new students to our university community, joining tens of thousands of returning students for the fall semester. System-wide, our incoming class hails from more than 70 countries and 48 US states. On the Twin Cities campus, we have the largest and most diverse incoming class in campus history, with 7,300 first-year students and 1,700 transfer students. Collectively, our greater Minnesota campuses also showed enrollment growth. And while this class of new U of M students brings diverse global experiences to our 5 campuses, 2/3 of them hail within the great state of Minnesota. Suffice it to say, it's an exciting moment in time for our university on so many levels. Speaking of excitement, we had a unique opportunity to come together last week, a part of the presidential inauguration ceremony. It's a wonderful time for the university to mark history, and we celebrated the university's tremendous 173-year history. We honored our shared achievements in research, education, and outreach, and we recognize the extraordinary impact this university has on our state and our nation and the world. I'm profoundly grateful for the support and collegiality that I received from the U of M community on September 18th. And I'm excited to work with our students, faculty, staff, and alums so that we can think boldly about what our university can look like and accomplish over the next decade and beyond. Building on our strong momentum, US News and World Report released its 2025 Best College Rankings this week, and I'm pleased to announce that U of M has maintained its position as one of the nation's leading public research universities. Here's a snapshot of how we fared in those latest rankings. Our Crookston campus ranks number 3 in top public schools among regional colleges in the Midwest. Crookston has remained in the top 4 of this category for 25 years. Our Duluth campus has moved up 1 spot to number 20 among regional universities in the Midwest, continuing its strong climb over the past 3 years. Duluth also ranked number 4 in top public schools among regional universities in the Midwest. Our Morris campus advanced 1 place to number 7th in the top public schools among national liberal arts colleges. And for a 3rd consecutive year, our Twin Cities campus maintained its overall ranking of number 23 among top public national universities. Any number of our programs on the Twin Cities campus were also signaled out for excellence within their fields. Rankings mean some things, they certainly don't mean everything, but these rankings do help illustrate the unwavering commitment of our faculty and staff to provide students from across the state and the nation and the world with an affordable world-class education. They also exemplify the collective drive and determination in the work that you're all doing to generate new knowledge, address global challenges, and enhance the quality of life for people here in Minnesota and beyond. As we move forward, I want to share some important updates regarding the university's capital plans and requests. I presented our 2024 6-year capital plan at this month's Board of Regents meeting, where I outlined a comprehensive approach to addressing the university's most pressing capital needs system-wide from 2025 through 2030. This capital plan is grounded in our strategic capital priorities, which include renewing high-priority buildings, investing in high-demand academic programs, advancing innovation in key research areas, enhancing student-facing facilities, and creating inclusive, accessible campus environments. This capital plan includes projects to be funded with state capital bonding, as well as with major projects funded by the university through a combination of debt, local unit resources, fundraising, and public-private partnerships. At this month's board meeting, I also presented our 2025 state capital request, which outlines the submission the U of M will make to the state for consideration during the 2025 legislative session. This year, requests focus on two critical initiatives. First, a $200 million request for higher education asset preservation and replacement, fondly known as HEAPR funding, which remains the cornerstone of our strategy to preserve and renew our existing infrastructure. Second, we're requesting a $30 million to advance our leadership in agricultural research and support the future of Minnesota's farming and food systems. This is the first step of a larger multi-year plan for several $100,000 of investment in the farm project. It's imperative that we prioritize the investments of existing physical assets in the most cost-effective way to support our mission, while reaffirming commitment to improving our student experience, research competitiveness, and climate sustainability. I look forward to providing the Senate more updates on the university capital plans and requests in the coming months. Thank you for your time and attention, and this concludes my president's report. Item number 7, as I learned here at my first meeting, is questions to the president. There were no questions submitted in advance of today's meeting, but I'm happy to use this time to take questions from the floor. I'll look for people to raise hands and to call on them as you come up into my queue here. Wonderful. Emily?
Hi, thank you. My name is Emily Beck, and I'm a faculty senator from the libraries. So given that the Faculty Senate and CLA Assembly voted no confidence in Provost Croson, I'm curious why you put her in charge of leading the administration's response to the no confidence vote. It seems like a conflict of interest, and I'm especially curious about how this decision aligns with your understanding of the role of shared governance here. Thank you.
So I'll clarify, and sorry, you just moved around my screen. There you go. I'll clarify, she was not put in charge of the no confidence vote. She was put in charge of the follow-up for how we understand the hiring practices around positions that are split positions between staff and faculty. So I'll remind everybody, first of all, so that the this event happened before my time and start here. The week before I started, or my first week, the board also noted very clearly their support both for President Ettinger's decision as well as for Provost Croson and her leadership. And as I started in my first week, I thought it was important that we look ahead for the community for how we were going to address this confusing issue on this director hire. As I talk to many people, it's pretty clear that there are a variety of views about the hiring practices. I know people believe resolutely that there is one answer to that, but your policies and procedures here are complex, and the governance and administrative policies and up to board policies are unique to the University of Minnesota. And I certainly can't come in on my first week and say that I know what your policies and procedures are here, including those around hiring. And I would not want to overstep the current policies and procedures that are here. And so we need to come to a shared understanding of what those are. I support Provost Croson and her ability to set that path forward for us. She will not be alone managing that committee. We will set up a committee. It will have chairs underneath it. It will have representatives across groups to get to the understanding of how we do hiring. What your policies have said here for years around what hiring is done for staff positions that are also faculty positions. And I think then together we'll come to a collective understanding on that and we'll move forward. I understand your question about shared governance, and I understand that there was a 52% no confidence vote on Provost Croson. That also speaks to me that it's a very divided campus in a very divided time. And as I come in, I have decided that she's the best person for us to move forward on this. And I have confidence in her ability to set up this committee and for us to then come to the shared understanding that we need to have. I do appreciate the advisement of shared governance on that issue. And we'll come to a conclusion on the policies and procedures for hiring after that. Again, it will not be managed entirely. There will be a committee set up underneath Provost Croson for that. Thank you for the question. I'm sorry, let me call the next person. I'm forgetting my protocols here. Carrie Ann.
Hello, Dr. Cunningham. Thank you so much. I am a faculty senator from the medical school. So as a colleague and physician, I'm very happy to welcome you to this position. So in a similar line of questioning and recognizing the complexity that you just outlined with regard to our hiring practices, do you think or do you feel that our former interim president should have rescinded that offer, or that the president should overstep a properly conducted search or override a dean's decision? Is that your general practice or thought?
So many of you who have come into leadership positions know it's not wise to walk in on your second day and decide that you're going to overrule or know better than all the people that have come before you, or Monday morning quarterback all the decisions that have been made in the weeks before you. I'm looking ahead, and I ask all of you to look ahead with me. We will respect the university policies and procedures that are here in place, and we will figure this out together, and then we will move ahead. In the meantime, we have a director, an interim director, that is quite fabulous and is willing to stay in place over the course of this next year while we sort it out. And together we'll figure it out and we'll move forward. Thank you for the question. I don't see a first name here. Is it Vivi?
Hi, Dr. Cunningham. My name is Vivi Ganeshananthan. I also go as Sugi. I'm a faculty senator from CLA, the English department. And in the same vein, I'm wondering if you think it's acceptable to unhire a scholar because some people disagree with their publicly engaged scholarship. It seems to me like actions like that undermine the principles of academic freedom that we hold dear on this campus, and also discourage scholars from engaging on matters of urgent concern that are also of urgent concern to the broader public. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So, and many of you might know my scholarship also. So you should know something about this, because I think it might give you a sense of how I value academic freedom and how it's intersected with my career. So as a physician doing public health work, I was involved in injury and violence prevention, and I really led the country forward in gun violence research in a bipartisan way. And I was able to do that kind of study and research at a time when it wasn't accepted either from in the public, in journals, or in funding agencies to be able to talk publicly or write about gun violence. It's because of academic freedom that I was able to move ahead with that scholarship. And I certainly appreciate scholars being able to write and discuss freely controversial issues and important issues to their time, even when they're not publicly accepted. So just kind of know that as the start. On the question of the CLA hire, I think I've talked about it a bit. It's not mine to judge those that happened before me and how those decisions were made. Going forward, I hope we can get some shared understanding about the practices here so that we can move forward in a positive way. Certainly, faculty hiring, and even that particular hire, is still up for debate in the history department. And I have said over and over again and publicly that I fully support the history department deciding to hire or not hire that faculty as they see fit. And certainly faculty hiring is well within the realm of the decision of the department to do that. The decision of how the hiring is made at center levels, you have many different centers here. You have centers that are fully staffed. You have centers that report to colleges. You have centers that report in a multidisciplinary way. And you can't simply expect on my second week or third week, or even in my third month, that will be sorted out here. We'll work on it together. I promise you we will come to a shared understanding of it based on your policies, and then we'll move forward. And I'll ask people to look forward, because it doesn't help us and it doesn't help our community to continue to look backward. We have to look forward. So thank you. Next question is Elizabeth.
Hello, thank you. I'm Elizabeth Boyle from the Sociology Department, and I wanted to ask you about student demonstrations. I served on the ad hoc committee, the Provost ad hoc committee this summer on student demonstrations, so I am familiar with the issues. And I'm concerned that the tiered intervention strategy at the lower levels inappropriately suppresses the speech of students who are engaging in peaceful, non-disruptive demonstrations. And that's simply because their demonstration violates certain technical details, like has more than 100 students or it's signs that are the wrong size, things that have nothing to do with disruption or violence. And let's remember, there are 55,000 students at the University of Minnesota. Almost every intro class at the University of Minnesota is more than 100 students. So in this context, I think trying to limit demonstrations to less than 100 people is unrealistic at best and suppression at worst. And I feel strongly that as a professor, I have an obligation to empower my students to be active members of civil society and be engaged in protest. So my questions for you are, how is this very restrictive policy doing that? Doesn't this restriction on peaceful protest undercut students' voices? And are you concerned that frustrating passionate young people in this way could spark more unrest rather than reduce unrest?
Great questions. Thank you, Elizabeth. So when I came into the university this summer, one of my first questions, obviously the world that we live in and the times that we live in, as well as with many events coming up this fall, including an election, which will be controversial no matter what happens. It's important to understand what has both been past practices and protocols, as well as policies around activism. And, let me say very clearly, I fully support student activism and support our students using their voices to change the world. So with that, it's also important to understand the context of the place that you're in. And so I asked my team to go ahead, and I think in some of these you heard about this summer, it sounds like, to try to help me understand what our policies were here at the University of Minnesota. And I was handed a long page with directions to 15 different websites to try to figure out exactly what our policies were, right? Very difficult. I think difficult and unfair to our young students, and even our older students for that matter, for them to understand what university policies are before they're potentially told that they're in violation of them. I'm most frustrated when I get a speeding ticket when I didn't know that the speed limit was 50. And you rarely get a speeding ticket when it's 50, when you're going 51, you usually get a speeding ticket when you're going 75. And so I think it's fair and important for us to educate our students as to what the policies and the laws are around student activism. What I found when we did that work here is your shared governance has passed policies over the past years that had a limit of 100 people on them and had signs and banners in them in that manner. Why we came to that number is not quite clear to me. And if people think it's the wrong number, then I encourage shared governance to change it. But me coming in the first couple of weeks and saying, I know better than all of you, and I'm going to change your policies, which have come through shared governance, I think would have been received quite badly by this group and by other groups as well. So, but I think practically our students, don't wind up being in violation when you're doing 51 on the road and not 50, right? But we do have to set some rules of the road out there so that we can also respect the rights and responsibilities of everybody else to learn and teach and have respected discourse around the campus. So I think that's a little bit of background. I think the other thing I would say there is, these are shared governance policies. I've certainly been questioned on them. I don't, had I been here in 2016, I think when the policy was last changed, maybe we would have come to 100 and maybe we wouldn't have collectively, but that does seem to be where your university and my university now have landed. I suspect it had something to do with crowd control at the time and perhaps in the wave of activism that happened at that moment. But I think we've given the students many opportunities. There's been many protests this fall on campus, many of them completely within the policies that we have. And those have gone on, and I'm sure you've all seen and read about them. And so, I move it more akin to, we don't say you can't drive on the road because we tell you the speed limit's 55. We simply tell you that this is the speed limit and it's 55. I will say there's many universities around the country that changed their practices this summer, changed their policies this summer for what was allowed. And many of them did that in ways that overruled shared governance and didn't go through processes, right? And I was not going to do that. Many universities around the country came to the place where they will not allow any protests without a permit. Zero. we also didn't put that forward. So that's a little bit of background there, but I hope you'll continue and others will continue to have students and other folks use their voices for protest and for activism. I also encourage them to try to do that in a manner that's most effective, because what they want really is change, not necessarily to get arrested. And so how we can help them focus their efforts towards effective protest is also quite important. I think we're about at time here. I'm going to take one more question. Somebody's giving me a note that our 10 minutes for questions are up, but I guess I talked too long. So thank you, Elizabeth, for your question. Yali, if I'm saying your name correctly, went somewhere.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you so much for that explanation. That's super helpful. I guess my question is why the plan was proposed as such a hastily, like, unpublicized meeting for the Board of Regents on August 27th. Shouldn't there have been some sort of conversation with faculty governance and see how that might have influenced it?
And here you're not talking to our protest policies. Here your question is about the Board of Regents moving their policy forward on divestment, correct?
Both.
So, okay. So on the first part there, the Board of Regents started discussing divestment in May before I got here, as it came up through campus. In June, students moved forward. In July, on my second week, they brought their resolution forward for first discussion by the board, and then they revised it over the summer as they usually do after a first initiation of board policy, and then they brought it back for approval. The board at any time can call a special meeting. They very much wanted those to be out there before to answer the questions that had been going on over the past couple months for the community, and for the community to be clear about what their response was on that. In terms of the policies for providing clarity on what the policies were for protests in general, we didn't change the policies at all. We simply wrote out in a simple way what those policies were, and all that was presented in the August meeting was what your current policies are. So that wasn't something to come through shared governance, it just is. And again, if shared governance doesn't like those policies, then shared governance has a process for changing them. What I did put out in the August meeting, which is partly in response to shared governance and the issues that came up through the year in the past, is we did hear, and I'm told came through before, that there was an interest by the community in not having the police be the first response to protest. And because of that, we decided to try to make clear that we would, whenever possible, try to have our student life and our educational folks provide educational warnings first before a police response, as long as safety allows, right? I came in July, and the fall is already upon us. And so that seemed to be in line with the response that shared governance was interested in and before, and doesn't require policy. It is simply how we enforce policies that are existing. We are definitely out of time now, and I'm getting the evil eye. So I think we're going to have to move on. But thank you both so much for those questions. And I'm happy to take other questions at a later time in a variety of formats. So let's see. Number 8 is the Provost's report. Provost Croson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Cunningham, and good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to start off with a little more detail on the fall planning and protest response that was the result of some of these questions and that President Cunningham mentioned. So as she mentioned, she convened a group this summer that was tasked with collecting up our policies around protests and creating a one-page handout summarizing them with links, and then working out a process by which we would address policy violations. As President Cunningham mentioned, no policies were changed or altered, unlike at other universities where they did make some significant changes. To respond to, and I apologize if I get this wrong, Yali, while Faculty Senate wasn't meeting over the summer, I did consult with FCC leadership. And as Elizabeth has alluded to, we identified a representative set of faculty senators to meet with me 3 times over the course of the summer to give us input into these processes in advance of presentation to the board in August. Those processes and the short one-page handout of policy and other issues can be found on the website that I will drop in the chat as soon as the remarks are done. As President Cunningham alluded to, this process for this year involves 2 differences from last spring, based in part on what we heard from you and other leaders. The first, as she mentioned, is that the first point of contact will be student affairs, not our public safety officers. And that's been implemented in the 5 protests we've had so far. And I expect it to be implemented at the one that I think is being planned for 4 p.m. today. The second deviation or innovation is that we added an intermediate consequence for a conduct code violation, which might include an interim suspension before students are actually arrested. So that there's sort of a 4th stage that we put, in addition to the warnings, there's a stage there that's sort of designed to try to reduce the likelihood of us having to actually arrest our students. We've had extensive communication with the UMN Divest Coalition and all other student groups to make sure they understand the policies and the process so that they can decide whether they want their protests to reflect free expression or whether they want to cross the line into civil disobedience and that they understand the consequences of that decision. I've been asked over this fall to lead the engagement with our faculty around this procedure, and we're planning a few different initiatives here. The first is regular engagement with the University Senate's Campus Safety Committee. So Vice President of Student Affairs, Calvin Phillips, and Chief Matt Clark and I will be meeting with that committee basically every other meeting, at their September meeting, at their November meeting, at their February meeting, to hear their feedback on the plan, but also on its implementation. As a reminder, this committee was set up in response to the Cedric Alexander report after the George Floyd murder in order to help monitor and guide our campus safety activities. The second consultation that we're going to be doing this fall, again, after consultation with FCC chairs and with FCC itself, FCC has agreed to provide some real-time input in the case of a protest that escalates into civil disobedience. So this will likely involve jumping on a Zoom call on 5 or 10 minutes notice, learning about what's happening, and offering their input into how we should progress through our procedure, which I would then convey to the incident response team that's making the real-time decisions. As time permits, when we have advance notice, I may ask FCC to give us input the day before an anticipated event. So for example, we did that the day before the inauguration so that we can maybe avoid in real time 5-minute notice kind of huddle. But I will continue to keep FCC in the loop as we progress through the fall. The third engagement is that we would like to identify faculty with expertise in de-escalation, especially to help train our student affairs staff. Our public safety staff receives regular training in de-escalation, but this intervention by our student affairs staff is new to them, and giving them some formal training would be helpful. We especially love to leverage the expertise of our faculty in these roles. I'll be asking the deans to nominate their own faculty, but if you know of someone who would be good in this role, please feel free to drop me an email with their contact information, and we're happy to compile a list and start reaching out. So that's my update on our fall plans. I do have a couple of other items, and then I'm happy to take questions as well. So we have only one dean search going on this year. That's the Dean of Pharmacy. I am delighted that Amy Pittenger, former FCC chair, has agreed to serve as interim dean for this academic year while we search for that permanent position. We're also continuing the work of the core curriculum committee, and so you'll see updates on potential new core curriculum coming through this year. I've been asked by FCC to think about a working group around artificial intelligence. And so I'm going to be working with FCC leadership to think about who might be involved in that exercise. We're going to be doing a presentation on artificial intelligence in October for the Board of Regents. So anyone who's interested in that topic, I encourage you to attend or watch on YouTube during real time or watch on YouTube afterwards. But we do definitely want to get faculty input into the question of how we integrate AI into our mission. And so we'd be glad to do that. Two other topics that I'll mention briefly. So our HLC reaccreditation visit is scheduled from a year from now, so September 2025. And so we'll be spending this year preparing the materials, getting ready for that visit. And then finally, we're continuing to work on efforts that the board wants to see around systemness in enrollment and programming and other items. And I look forward to talking with you about that too. And so with that, I'll take a pause and have a cough, and I'm happy to answer any questions people have.
Charles? Yep, video.
Hi, Provost Corzine, and I promise I'm not just asking this question to you because I didn't get a chance to ask to the president. It relates to both conversations. So I'm a civil service senator from University Services, by the way. So my question is, how does the administration commit to respond to demonstrations that cross red lines in terms of outright hate speech? Or are there red lines established at all? For instance, many in the Jewish community view calls for intifada and glory to Al-Aqsa flood, which was seen on campus last year, as anti-Semitic hate speech. And so how can we as a university ensure that at the same time we ensure that students and faculty and staff have as much freedom of speech as possible without making some sections of student body or staff feel physically unsafe or downright unwelcome on campus? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'm happy to answer, but I want to yield to President Cunningham if she wants to chime in.
I'd be happy to say something, but I think Rachel, you could, take this. Hate speech is never okay. There is speech, unfortunately, that is hateful, that is also free speech. And that is a difficult, complicated component. So, we are striving to make a welcoming climate and also to have a response and ability to do investigations when people feel that they've been individually targeted or harassed in any of the manners that cross the line from what is allowable free speech at our public university and public spaces. And also to support the people who, even when it's free speech and we have to allow it, we have to also understand that it's hurtful and can feel awful. And with that, I think we've done some work, and I've seen the good work that's been done here that came before me, which I'm grateful for, on how our teams are reaching out to people who they feel are on the other end of free speech that is allowable but hurtful, and how we can support the community in that manner. Provost Croson, whatever you want to add.
Yeah, no, I would just reiterate our bias response network has been very active during this time, as you might imagine, and I think they've done a really great job of receiving concerns, of investigating when it's appropriate, responding when they need to, but also to support the complainants, the person who has been damaged. And we're doing a number of things both for our Jewish students and for our Jewish faculty and staff to try to give them the support they need during this time where they might feel that these protests threaten them personally.
Kaya?
Yes, my name is Kaya Ganguly. I'm the alternate for Michael Galope. I'm from Cultural Studies and Comparative Literature in the College of Liberal Arts. First of all, welcome, Professor Dr. Cunningham. And we hope we will all be able to look back and then look forward. But sometimes in order to look forward, one also has to look back. So my question to the provost is the following. Were you involved in or aware of any communications with donors to the university regarding the matter of the rescinding of the job offer to Professor Raz Siegel this past summer? That is, are you aware of any donors who offered to cover the university's legal costs in exchange
Right.
for rescinding the job offer to Professor Raz Siegel? Thank
I'm
you.
not.
Okay.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Hi, thank you for taking my question. So my question is really, I'm a professor in family social science in the College of Education and Human Development and a specialist in the College of Extension. And so I'm curious to hear from both of you actually about your views about this university as a land grant school and our relationship to our communities and to our state and to the tribal nations that we share land boundaries with. And so I'm just curious your thoughts about that. My understanding, Dr. Cunningham, is that this is your first land grant school, and so this may be a new system for you. And so I'd like to hear what you think about that.
I
Both of
feel
you.
somewhat bad for usurping our provost's time here. I'll mention it quickly. It might be somewhat reassuring to you, Jennifer. Almost all of my scholarship was in community engaged work in public health. So working with communities has been core to what I've done for 25 years. It's one of the reasons I wanted to be at a land grant university. And I was very familiar with working with Extension in my time at Michigan as Extension reached, as I was doing opioid and substance use work in the communities across the state. So in terms of working with the tribal communities, I've had the honor to meet with some of the tribal leaders. Before I started, we've been working closely, and I've gotten to enjoy working with Karen Diver here. And I was felt very honored by the tribal drum circle at inauguration last week, which, as I understand, is just a tremendous honor. And so looking forward to working more. I think the land grant, we all have many opportunities to work many different places, and I chose to work here for a specific reason. I really believe in both the public and in the land grant mission. It really excites me. Provost Croson?
I'll also add, there's been, I think, some really positive moves in the last year in response to the Truth Report. So we're making great progress on the members collection. We think that's going to be resolved and all returned to the appropriate tribes this academic year. We've, as you probably saw, approved a new PhD program in American Indian Studies, right? That was approved by the board this year. And the American Indian Studies Department has been moved into a new and beautiful new home. And I'm told that they're very happy with their new location. So I think there's a number of initiatives that are underway that will, continue under leadership of President Cunningham.
Thank you. Okay, let's see, Jessica Lopez.
Hi, everyone. I hope my Wi-Fi is okay. Our internet's not the best in Scott Hall. Chicano Latino Studies, CLA Faculty Senate. Provost Croson, on May 6th, the Faculty Senate passed a resolution on the use of police force against student protesters. We just received the administration's response. The report by the Faculty Senate called for a wider consultation than just a small set of faculty senators. My first question is, will this wider consultation with students, faculty, and staff be achieved? And then a follow-up with that is that the Faculty Senate resolution wasn't calling on students to be educated about existing policies, but for a commitment by the administration not to deploy police against nonviolent protesters. So I understand the comments you were making previously in your report about having additional committees. But as a new senator, I'm very confused about this language of a shared governance in terms of creating the existing policies around protest, because I've been going through the archives and looking at previous minutes, and I don't see where this Faculty Senate as a whole voted on these protest policies. So I appreciate the insight to that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. So indeed, I was responsible for consulting with faculty during this summer process. Vice President Phillips was responsible for consulting with students, which he did, and Vice President Horstman was responsible for consulting with staff, which he did. So I represented the consultations that I did, but not all of the work that happened over the summer. On the policies, if you look at the summary document, the page back-to-back summary document, and you click on the links at the bottom for each policy, at the bottom of each policy, it will say when the policy was passed and when the policy was last reviewed. So my understanding is that the most recent review of these policies was in 2016, which President Cunningham kind of referred to, and that would normally happen through the consultation process that Amber put up, that, you know, with the link to who does what. But I encourage you to go and kind of look at a given policy, and as President Cunningham suggested, if there's a policy that you would like to change, we have a process for how to change policies, and I would encourage you to follow that.
Okay, I think we have one more time for one more question here. So Nathaniel Mills.
Thank you, Provost Croson. I'm Nathaniel Mills. I'm a faculty senator from the English department. I want to ask again about a comment that you made in the June 26, 2024 special Senate hearing over the situation with Roz Siegel and the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. At that meeting, you affirmed that any director of a research center, provided that the work they were engaged in the programming and leadership of that center, provided that work was academic work, would need and be entitled to the protections of academic freedom. And you affirmed that in response to a question from another faculty senator. And so I guess I'm concerned about, since President Cunningham has elected not to reverse President Ettinger's decision around the Siegel hire, how would potential new hires for this position, when that search is resumed, have confidence that the administration will protect their academic freedom in the writing and research and speaking they do in that position?
So maybe I'll respond first, and I'll see if President Cunningham wants to chime in. So I'm not 100% sure that that characterization is what I said, or maybe what I intended. You know, my response is that individuals involved in academic work, that work is protected under academic freedom. So your teaching, your research, those kinds of things. Whether the directorship of this center reflected that, that was not something I chimed in on, or necessarily, you know, prepared to conclude one way or another. But all of that said, as President Cunningham suggested, I think that the purpose of this task force that we've been discussing is to come to a shared understanding about what parts of when one has both an academic position and a staff or administrative position, what parts of one's work are protected in what way. And again, we intend to rely on our existing policies, and we encourage you to, you know, take a look at those policies and consider amending those policies if in the end you're not comfortable with where they land.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just chime in, and it's probably a broader conversation, but and I hear the community's concern about academic freedom. I really do. And again, I mentioned to you my background for a specific reason. So it is only because I had academic freedom to write about gun violence, which I wrote about as being the leading cause of death among children. It was only because I had academic freedom that I could write those articles, even though journals initially wouldn't publish them with the title of gun violence in them. I deeply understand the topic. And I know there seems to be concerns about what will happen in a future hypothetical when somebody is hired. I guess I might want to know more from this community at a different time of if there have been instances in the classroom or in your research where people have been told that their research that they are working on, that they can't write the scholarship that, and it's not a dialogue now, but this is something I want to understand from the community, because it's a little bit of a different question than the hiring component here. On the staff and the faculty component, and there's many different types of center directors here. When I try to figure out what the policies were for center directors, you know, there's 15 kinds of centers, and they have 15 kinds of different appointments, and we need to understand. I need to understand, but almost more importantly to me is once we get that person and they're hired, or any of you, you know, have there been problems with people's scholarship here being told that it's too controversial and actually can't be written or talked about in a certain way, or in the classroom where they're presenting your scholarship and teaching in your way where you've been muzzled, or your freedom has been limited. So I'll have other opportunities to engage with the community, but that'd be helpful for me coming in to understand the culture and the environment and where the concern comes from. I have to say I came from at least in the community that I was in before, I knew I could have that freedom to do that work on gun violence, and I didn't worry about my chair or my department telling me that I couldn't do work in gun violence or look at that important topic, even though it was controversial for them. And I hope that's true and will be true here as well. We are definitely out of time for questions, and I really appreciate these. So I am going to be nudged to move along here. So item number 10 is the SCC report. Professor Goodenow, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Cunningham, and welcome to chairing your first University Senate meeting. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Goodenow, and I'm an Associate Professor of Chemistry on the Morris campus. I currently serve as the elected chair of the Faculty Consultative Committee, and in this role, I also serve as the chair of the Senate Consultative Committee. Terry Leo is a professor in aerospace engineering and mechanics on the Twin Cities campus and is the current vice chair of both of these committees. So first, I will report on the Senate Consultative Committee and their charge to serve as a consulting body to the university president and to act as the executive committee of the University Senate. In these roles, the SCC represents students, civil service staff, academic professionals, and non-unionized faculty, and it is made up of members from all four of those groups. In my report today, I have a mix of what happened, what is happening, and a prediction about what will happen. So a mix of past and present. We know that sometimes the cogs of academia turn slowly, but I'm happy to report that sometimes they do turn. The Workforce Reinvestment Resolution was passed by this University Senate in 2022, and it continues to be an important focus for many of the constituencies in shared governance. I'm pleased to report that a priority of the Board of Regents for this upcoming year is to, quote, chart a financially sustainable course to invest in retaining and rewarding the university's talented faculty and staff. And they have created a special new committee, University Workforce, which is chaired by Regent Robin Ghali. Once again this summer, as last summer, shared governance leaders were invited by the administration to be part of 3 meetings to provide input into shaping the university's budget and the requests to the legislature. Compensation, as highlighted in the Workforce Reinvestment Resolution, is also appearing in this year's budget. There's a lot more information about that in the Board of Regents docket from September, but I want to highlight a phrase that stands out to me in there, which is, quote, the university must invest in its workforce. And that is backed up with proposed dollar amounts to ask of the legislature and the corresponding commitment on the university side. So we are having an impact. Also, from the past related to workforce, the SCC has met once already this fall, and we had considerable discussion about the ongoing peak implementation. I truly expect we'll hear more about this in the future. Also at that meeting, the leaders from the other consultative committees provided update on their recent and planned work. This is noted in your agenda. It's a blend of past and present. There are 3 bulleted items, and these were actions taken by the SCC on behalf of the University Senate. These are covered under 2 of the SCC charges: to correct grammatical and punctuation errors, and to approve other non-substantive technical amendments existing in administrative policies previously approved by the University Senate and in University Senate documents, and to act on behalf of the University Senate when a decision is required prior to the next scheduled meeting of the University Senate, when a decision is required when it would not be possible to convene a special meeting of the University Senate in a timely fashion. Based on those 2 things, we took 3 actions, but tied to that is the responsibility that such actions will be reported to the University Senate at its next meeting, and the University Senate may then overrule the Senate Consultative Committee. So you remain the final authority to the SCC on this. So the 3 bulleted items. First, the SCC corrected some grammatical errors and approved a change to the charge of the Equity, Access, and Diversity Committee to remove the phrase affirmative action following the related Supreme Court decision. Second, several years ago, the FCC and the SCC added an elected faculty member from the Rochester campus, and converted the Duluth faculty member from an ex officio to a regular elected position. As a reminder, the Duluth faculty member must be from the medical or pharmacy faculty. In that process, one update to the SCC charge within the University Senate rules was missed, and we have made that correction. The SCC approved updates to the Board of Regents policy on sexual harassment, sexual assault, and other forms of sex discrimination following changes to the federal Title IX policy. There is an intervening court case, and the changes will go into effect following that. Item 13 on your agenda has more information and additional updates to related administrative policies. And I will end with a look to the future. And that look to the future is mere minutes ahead. There will be a discussion at the Faculty Senate on a report from the Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee on academic units issuing statements on matters of public concern, followed by an update from the President's Task Force on Institutional Speech, which has been charged with developing policy or policies on institutional statements, which is expected to be delivered to the Senate in December, after a substantive update in October. So, university senators who are not faculty senators are always welcome to stay on this Zoom meeting for the Faculty Senate meeting, and they are able to speak, but only if yielded time by a faculty senator. President Cunningham, this concludes my report of the SCC. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Item 11 is introductions to the Senate. I'll begin by introducing Alice Roberts Davis. Alice Roberts Davis has served as the Vice President of University Services since June of 2023. University Services is a team of 3,700 people responsible for creating and maintaining the physical environment and support functions that further the teaching, research, and outreach mission of the university. Services include real estate, construction, facilities maintenance, student housing, dining, parking, transportation, bookstores. Wow. University Services support all 5 system campuses. Prior to joining the university, Roberts Davis was part of the Governor Tim Walz's cabinet as commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Administration. She was responsible for overseeing and managing the administrative functions of 26 other executive branch state agencies and 40 small agencies. She also worked for Target Corporation for 12 years in different real estate, supplier diversity, and government compliance leadership capacities. Roberts Davis earned her BA in Communications Journalism from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and a Juris Doctor from Florida State University. Vice President Roberts Davis, welcome. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you so much, President Cunningham. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm really excited to be here and share the great work that's happening in University Services. I celebrated my 1-year anniversary at the university in June, and I'm probably biased, but I think it's the best job at the university. It's really interesting work. There's never a dull moment. I have a great team, and we're serving students, faculty, and staff, so there's nothing more fun than that. We deliver the non-academic operations across the university system. We're responsible for creating and maintaining the places and the spaces that support the teaching, research, and outreach mission of the university. So everything from behind the scenes work that includes housing our students and serving the food, heating and cooling buildings, caring for the grounds, building and renovating facilities, and planning for the future of our campuses. We work to make a more environmentally sustainable campus as well. We like to say that we make the university work. So just a few examples of that I wanted to share. Just over the past 6 months, we completed the University of Minnesota Rochester Campus and Climate Action Plan. The Twin Cities and Duluth plans were already complete. We published the Twin Cities Climate Resilience Plan, which articulates our priorities and measurable outcomes in response to local climate hazard research. We launched CourseWorks, which most of you are probably familiar with now. It's our new comprehensive course materials program, which is a collaborative effort between the university's campus bookstores and libraries, and that launch was successful. We also completed renovations and negotiated a lease for the launch of a new off-campus safety center in Dinkytown, which has been incredibly warmly received by students. We supported President Cunningham's inauguration, and we delivered a nearly zero waste event. We had 97.7% waste diversion overall at that event, and we beat 54 colleges and universities in the game day football zero waste challenge, and we diverted nearly 8,000 pounds of food from a single football game. Finally, we received an International Parking and Mobility Apex Innovation Award for the Employee and Universal Transit Pass programs. And so hopefully all of you are using and enjoying that free transit across the cities. As we look ahead, we're thinking about Fraser Hall, the undergraduate chemistry building, which serves 6,000 students annually, and the offsite collection facility, which will provide initial shelving capacity for 2.5 million library volumes. Those are both under construction and on schedule for opening. We're renovating the UMD main production kitchen in order to increase their capacity and achieve operational efficiencies. We are refining and completing the Morris and Crookston campus and climate action plans, and we continue to expand our inventory of electric vehicles offered through fleet services. I also want to mention that the robots are coming. We have a plan for piloting on-campus food delivery through the use of robots via Starship Technologies on the Twin Cities campus. And although we haven't yet formally announced it, we're working on mobile credentialing, which will allow our community to use their smartphones and watches to access university facilities and facilities and services system-wide. So very excited for that. We have a lot of conversations with shared governance groups. As a matter of fact, I'm part of the Senate Committee on Finance and Planning as an ex officio member, but I'm happy to engage with any other groups, including the University Senate. And I, again, just really appreciate your time and the very warm welcome, the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much, Vice President Roberts Davis. I would like then to now introduce Raj Singh. Raj Singh is a professor of finance and vice provost and dean of undergraduate education at the university. He's been a member of the faculty at the University of Minnesota since 1999. From 2015 to 2021, he served as the associate dean for undergraduate education at the Carlson School of Management. Before that, he served for 4 years as the chair of the Department of Finance at the Carlson School of Management. He received a BS in mechanical engineering from, Raj, I might not quite get this correct, University in 1985, and an MBA in information science from Baruch University of New York in 1989, and an MS in finance from Carnegie Mellon in 1991, and a PhD in finance also from Carnegie Mellon in 1995. He has held previous appointments at Washington University in St. Louis, University of Michigan, and Arizona State University. He's published papers in all the top tier journals in finance, and some of the topics he's published his research on are mergers and acquisitions, agency theory, market microstructure, initial public offerings, auction models, and municipal bonds. Welcome, Vice Provost Singh. I've really enjoyed getting to know you over these past 2 months. Would you like to take a minute or two to address the Senate?
Thank you, President Cunningham, and I will take a minute or two. As you said, I have been here for 25 years. This is my 26th year, and I've had the privilege and the honor to be at the Carlson School in this past time. As a researcher, I'm broadly an applied game theorist, and I would like to underline the applied part and not the theorist part. My work is mostly merger acquisitions, bidding models, and so on. But before I get on, I sure want to thank you senators for the service you have done to this institution and you're doing, the institution we all love. The University of Minnesota has been very kind and generous to me. I feel very loyal to the institution, and I promise to do all I can to serve in this new role that I have for the last 2 months or so. There are a few things, my principles that guide me that I'd like to share with you. First of all, I'll always keep the students first. It's their long-term interests that matter to all of us. That's what I believe is the mission of the university, and I'll work as hard as I can to advance their progress. Second, I strongly believe that no one has a monopoly on good ideas, or for that matter, bad ideas. I look forward to hearing from all of you. I plan to learn from you, and if any time you have something you want to share, some thought you have about our educational system, about our students, what we can do, please knock on my email door or my physical door, and I would love to come over and meet with you. Third, I believe in strong partnerships. There's nothing that I in my office can do without the help of all the colleges, other central offices, our external partners, the foundation, and so on. And I promise to work hard with all of you and your institutions and your colleges to make things better for the university. thank you once again for inviting me to your space, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you so much, Vice Provost Singh. Item 12 concerns administrative policy, student services fee, and Board of Regents policy, tuition and fees, and is presented for information. Item 13 concerns updated Title IX regulations and is presented for information. Item 14 concerns old business. There is no old business for the University Senate. Item 15 concerns new business for the University Senate. Please note that any new business will refer to a committee unless it is special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there any new business? Is there a motion for adjournment? Is that where we're at? Okay. No, is there a second? I need a second. Thank you, Carrie Lee. Many seconds. Amber, please initiate the poll.
Few more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. With 124 ayes and 0 nays, that motion carries.
Great, we are adjourned. Thank you. So we're running a little bit ahead of time. So I propose here we take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 4 p.m. Thank you. I think we're ready to get started. After that little bio break. So with that, I will now call the Faculty Senate to order. Item number 2 concerns administrative responses to Faculty Senate actions and is presented for information. Item number 3 is approval of minutes from the Faculty Senate meetings on May 6th and June 26th. Amber, please initiate the poll.
Ten more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. With 64 ayes and 0 nays, that motion carries.
Item number 4 is the FCC report. Professor Goodnow, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Cunningham. Similar to the SCC report, I have some past, present, and future items to highlight for you today. Some of this may actually be a little bit of a duplication from things we talked about in the University Senate meeting, but this is in my role as the FCC chair. From the past, following the Midsummer Faculty Senate vote of no confidence in Interim President Ettinger and Provost Croson, FCC leadership had discussions with President Cunningham about the vote in the early days of her tenure. As noted, President Cunningham shared her plans related to this moving forward in a university-wide email, Academic Freedom and Administrative Hiring on July 15th. Like the upcoming unit statement discussion, this is an issue involving academic freedom and accountability that will continue to be discussed by the FCC as well as other Senate committees, with a goal of ensuring that the administration is well aware of the faculty and other perspectives. The FCC has similar charges to the SCC that I covered in my earlier report, where they can act on behalf of the Faculty Senate with the same expectation that those are reported to the Faculty Senate at the next meeting, and they can also be overturned by the Faculty Senate. On the agenda, you can see that the FCC approved an update to the Board of Regents policy faculty tenure on behalf of the Faculty Senate. Considering that there is perhaps no policy more sacred to faculty than this was not a decision that the FCC took lightly, and I want to take this moment to clearly articulate that change right now in my report and not assume that everyone clicked on the link and found the change. The Board of Regents changed the title of their policy from sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence to sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and other forms of sex discrimination. So in section 10.4 on page 15, the name of that policy is changed to the new policy name. Essentially, and relationship violence is replaced with and other forms of sex discrimination in the policy title. Continuing to move along through a busy summer, the FCC held its annual retreat in August. The FCC discussed such topics as strategic vision and planning, academic freedom, unit statements, Senate processes, and our general future topic priorities. We are appreciative to the several administrators who made time to talk with us about workforce reinvestment resolutions, employee engagement, campus climate, and potential fall protests and civic engagements. Finally, we had time at that retreat to meet President Cunningham and hear what she is working on for the academic year. As recently noted in item 2, the resolution on the use of police force against student protests that was passed in May, the response was just added to the docket this morning, so I want to be sure to note that that was an update that you can look at. Prior to that response, there had already been conversations between the provost and faculty governance, and you heard about some of those in the provost report. Several faculty senators were invited in August to meet with Provost Croson to discuss the developing fall plans on the process of how to respond to such protests and civic engagement. And I want to thank and share my appreciation with those senators for being able to engage with the provost on such short notice. As mentioned as well, the FCC has had an opportunity on short notice to huddle, as she calls it, with Provost Croson, specifically on September 17th, about the expected protests on September 18th at the inauguration. Earlier today, Provost Croson attended the FCC meeting to debrief about those protests and others which have happened this fall, and we continue to learn more about the ongoing efforts to balance allowing free expression, maintaining campus safety, and adherence to policy. It is expected that the provost will continue to invite FCC to be part of these conversations as needed. 2 weeks ago, we had our first FCC meeting where we had a discussion with our newest faculty legislative liaison, Professor Mark B., who you may remember as giving these reports last year as your FCC chair. I expect we'll be hearing from him and our additional FLL, Professor Rob Blair, at a future Senate meeting on their engagement with the legislature on behalf of the Faculty Senate. We met earlier today and had a continuing discussion about many of the topics mentioned elsewhere in this report and elsewhere in our University Senate and Faculty Senate meetings. Very recently in the past, I had the honor and privilege to serve as the faculty mace bearer at President Cunningham's inauguration and welcome her on behalf of Shared Governance. Moving on to the present. As mentioned in my earlier SCC report, item 6 on the agenda will be a discussion and vote to endorse the AF&T report on unit statements. And item 7 will be an update from the President's Task Force on Institutional Speech. You may recall in February, AF&T brought a resolution asking the Faculty Senate to charge them with writing this report. As part of the administrative response to that resolution, the President's Task Force on Institutional Speech was formed. AF&T chose not to be part of that task force, but instead bring the resolution and report. There is a long 2+ year history of engagement on this topic, and today marks just the next of several upcoming steps towards a policy or policies on institutional statements. Today, the President's Task Force is first here to listen and learn as we discuss the AF&T report, so that they may move forward in their charge, knowing the questions, comments, feedback, or concerns shared by senators today. Then secondly, Chair Phil Bullman will update us on the past, present, and future work of the task force. Looking ahead into that future work, in October, I'm expecting we'll hear about the next step from the unit statement conversation from that President's Task Force on Institutional Speech, where I expect we will see drafts of a potential policy or policies where there will be an opportunity for discussion. Following our general practice of discussion at one meeting and voting at the next, the policy or policies will be back in December for more discussion and a vote. Now, just in case you thought you knew all the acronyms at the university, I'm going to throw 2 at you right now. PAC and PPC, which stand for the Policy Advisory Committee and the President's Policy Committee. Our vote in December is advisory to the administration and those 2 groups. The PPC is authorized by the President to provide final institutional review and approval of administrative policies. So the PPC can then move a policy forward for its 30-day review period. If I were a more talented person, this whole section could have been a Schoolhouse Rocks video on how a policy is made. Finally, I'd like to mention some other unfinished work from last spring, which I know many of you here are wondering about. It'll be a December to remember, although Lexis has not agreed to an NIL deal yet. I expect our December agenda to include a core curriculum 2025 update. Then I'm anticipating an updated core curriculum proposal for discussion in February with a vote at the following meeting in March. This concludes my FCC report. Thank you, President Cunningham.
Thank you. And if you make that video, I will definitely watch it. I think it could be it could go viral.
Just like your video with the football team?
That was a lot of fun. Didn't know that was going to happen. Item 5 is questions for the FCC chair. The floor is now open for questions. With that, Marie Calhoun.
Hi, thank you. Marie Culhane from the College of Veterinary Medicine. I have a question for the FCC chair about whether or not you think it's appropriate for the provost and the president to set up these separate task forces to conduct what's essentially duplicating the work that is appropriately carried out by a Senate committee. So I'm thinking in particular about this unit statement task force that was set up that addresses the task on academic freedom and hiring. The Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee would be the appropriate venue for those discussions, would it not?
I certainly don't have the charge of AF&T memorized, but I do know that one of the considerations in those multiple years of consultation was around the specifics of the charge of AF&T. And for example, they are not able as part of their charge to develop policy. And so a component of, so speaking to the task force that we will hear from, they were charged with developing policy, and that is not something that is the purview of the Senate as part of that. In terms of I would defer to the, I would defer to the first word in those task forces, which is presidential. It is the president's task force on institutional statements. And while we advise and consult, these are, I suppose, the purview of interim President Ettinger before, and any future task forces would be the purview of President Cunningham.
Thank you. Kate Haynes, Kat Haynes.
Thank you. Kat Hayes, I'm in the anthropology department, faculty senator for CLA. And I appreciate the mention that you had discussions in your role as FCT chair over the summer regarding the vote of no confidence in interim President Ettinger and Provost Croson. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit more, especially given your role as FCC chair and the duty that the FCC has to carry out the will of the Faculty Senate, and how that conversation unfolded.
So I will also say I took over this role on July 1st. So there's a component of this that defers to our former chair, Mark B, on a piece of this. I think the context of our conversation was quite informational in sharing information with President Cunningham about what had happened at that meeting. Some of the lead up to it, there had been conversations at FCC, and so we shared some additional context with President Cunningham from the FCC with that. And I would say it was an opportunity for us to hear from her very similar comments that we heard earlier in the University Senate meeting. So yeah, I would say, and I mean, I think we conveyed the results, the sentiment of, and the context around it as best we could. And yeah, I would leave it at that.
Thank you. Stacy Maher.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Stacy Maher, chair of the Civil Service Consultative Committee, and I'd like to ask for a senator to yield me time.
I yield my time.
Thank you. In 2024, interim President Ettinger created a special work group titled Faculty Professional Conduct Review and Implementation Group. This work was great, important, and critical to providing a framework for positive workplace culture. As chair of Civil Service, I seek the Faculty Senate's partnership in moving this initiative forward. I'm saddened to share that many staff are on the brunt end of unprofessional, belittling behavior that our current Board of Regents Code of Conduct nor Office of Conflict Resolution find true resolution within. As I understand it, this work did not move forward from the Faculty Senate, and while it was before your time as chair, will you please share how you might consider moving this work forward?
I will start with admitting some ignorance about that effort and what happened in those moments at Faculty Senate around that. And so it would not necessarily be appropriate for me to speculate on that. However, I think what I am willing to say and hear your concerns is if this is a FCC issue, I think we can work with the University Senate office to have you come and talk to the FCC and basically provide me some additional education about how we might work together to understand it better at least, and then see what we could maybe do. So thank you.
Thank you. And is this another question by Marie Callahan? Yeah.
I'd like a follow-up to the previous question that I had. If there's time, I'd like to hear what Eric Van Wyck has to say as chair of the AF&T about AF&T's involvement or lack thereof in the task force to look at academic freedom and tenure around the hiring process.
Yeah. So I might need a moment for protocol. I believe questions are for the FCC chair right now. So if you give me a moment, I will consult on procedure.
Thank you.
Thanks for humoring my lessons in protocol. So questions right now are for Jen Godna. Eric is presenting next. So any other questions for Jen? Okay, then. Hearing no other questions. Item 6 is discussion and action on the Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee's Academic Freedom and Unit Statements Report and Policy Recommendations on Academic Units issuing statements on matter of public concern. I will first call on Professor Eric Van Wyck, excuse me, Chair of AF&T, to provide an overview of the report.
Thank you, President Cunningham. I took the liberty of making a few slides as academics like us are wont to do, so I believe I'm set up to share these. Hopefully folks can see all that now. Let me get a few things out of the way. Yeah, thanks very much. So, right, I saw Eric Van Wyck, rhymes with Dick Van Dyke, if you have trouble remembering the pronunciation, but anyway, so I'm back. I was here in February of earlier this year, sort of asking the Senate. We had a resolution asking the Senate to charge us with diving into this issue of academic freedom and unit statements and how this all sort of works together. So today I'm reporting back on that work that you asked the committee to go off and do, right? So you'll see the committee members listed on your screen there. I wanted to do this to, let you see their names. I wanted to thank them for the hard work they put into this. This is a committee effort. You'll notice there's kind of a wide range of folks here. We have tenure track and P&A faculty, librarians, students, a postdoc, support from ex officio folks, and also maybe a shout out to Jeanette Poole, our staff person who has since retired, but was essential in guiding us through all this work. So what I'd like to do is just briefly present some of the highlights of the report and the accompanying recommendations. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at those. I appreciate that it's kind of a long report. The committee, we put aside essentially all the work we were planning to do last spring to dive into this. We had a couple extra meetings. And so what you have here is then the result of that. So it contains an analysis of this question of units issuing unit statements, and then also a set of recommendations for any forthcoming policy that sort of fell out of that work. So also to do this, then I think we have time for some discussion and questions. And after that, there's a motion to then have a vote to endorse or not the report and the recommendations, right? There's a couple reasons to sort of do that. One is it's sort of normal business, I think, for the Senate to ask a committee to go do some work and then, endorse or not endorse the work that they've done. More importantly, though, I think it's important for the Senate to sort of see this as an opportunity in which it can make its voice heard, right? So the next steps in all this are draft policy will come before this body to be voted on. And so this is an opportunity for the Senate to sort of say, hey, we agree with what AF&T did or not agree with that. And this makes sure that we hope at least that this is a way for the Senate to have some impact on what is actually brought forth in the next steps here. So the short answer to this question, right, is that the committee spent a lot of time on this, but ended up recognizing that units should be allowed to issue these sort of statements on matters of public concern, that there's no need for a ban. A ban is essentially too blunt of an instrument to address the legitimate concerns that are raised by these statements. And so in doing all this work, we kind of leaned on a few particular documents, right? The first is the Board of Regents policy on academic freedom and responsibility. I've highlighted a few pieces here. This is just a cutout of that policy, right? And so we think of academic freedom as this freedom to do our work without institutional discipline or restraint. This includes certainly our scholarly work, our teaching, but also relates to issues of matters of public concern. But with academic freedom comes along this notion of academic responsibility. They go hand in hand. And so one important aspect of that here is to make it clear that when one is, speaking on matters of public concern, you're making it clear that you're not doing that for the institution as a whole. All right. So this is sort of where we begin. The next thing we took a close look at and got some guidance from was the mission of the university. And so again, there are sort of three components to the mission: research, teaching, and sort of outreach and public service. And what struck us was the mission statement is pretty sort of outward looking, right? It definitely is sort of looking out to the community. I've highlighted some pieces here relevant to that talks about, work that's related to communities across the state, the nation, and the world, applying scholarly expertise to community problems, making the knowledge and resources created and preserved in the university accessible to citizens of the nation, the state, the nation, and the world. So there's very much an outward sort of looking focus to at least parts of this mission. And so the work we did and the results we came to were really driven by these two Board of Regents policies. So the sort of big question that sort of comes up in all this, right, is do units have academic freedom? And if so, does it extend to writing of unit statements? And here we ended up on yes and yes for these questions, right? So the first one, right, do units have some notion, at least in a practical sense, of academic freedom, right? And they certainly have autonomy in carrying out many aspects of the mission of the university, right? So part of the mission about research, units set their research directions, they set their curricular development, how they develop curriculum and what that curriculum is. They, set priorities on admitting graduate students, of hiring faculty members. Fundamentally, they have the freedom to go about and do their academic work. And so it seemed that certainly in a practical way, at least, units have this autonomy or this freedom to get on with the business of doing their work, right? In our discussions, there was some dissenting views on this, right? So there were a couple members of the committee who disagreed on this point. And it sort of came down to a question of, do we see units as what we call a conglomerate collective, right? One where the identity of the unit or the collection is sort of preserved as new members come in and new members leave, right? That was more the view of the majority. The minority saw it in a sense as an aggregate collective, right? Where the rights of the group are really sort of, they come about because of rights of the individuals in that group. And that's the only place where the group gets its sense of rights. So that was a point of dissension that I think is important to recognize, but the majority of the committee felt that this was answer this question affirmatively. On the sort of the next part of this question, right, is what about unit statements? If we do have academic freedom as units, does this extend to writing statements on matters of public concern? Right. And again, here the committee sort of read the mission and says, wow, there's a lot of writing in the mission about looking outward and engaging with the community. It's really hard to see a special cutout for that kind of work when it comes to units and the work that they do. Right. The dissenting view is more or less, saw statements as things that were disjoint from the scholarly work of the unit. We didn't have time and we did not do a sort of full analysis of a lot of statements that have been written, but we looked at quite a few and they really seem to have a perspective that comes from the scholarship of the unit. So these were not sort of, at least not most of them, there was a few perhaps, but most of them were really focused on a topic and they were bringing their scholarly perspectives to bear on that particular topic. And so we felt that certainly then this notion of academic freedom or autonomy extends to writing these kinds of statements. So what does that mean? This means a ban is too blunt of an instrument, but it doesn't mean that these notions of responsibility don't apply. And so this question of having a disclaimer on a unit statement makes complete sense, and those are certainly appropriate things to do. From here, we sort of had two questions we spent some time on then. And that's, when does academic freedom of the individual come into conflict with the academic freedom of the unit, right? Is this possible? Certainly it is. And the question then is, well, can this conflict be navigated, right? And then also a question of how are unit statements to be disseminated? So these are the things that sort of get into, if these are allowed, how do we have the processes and procedures to make this work in a way that respects the academic freedom of the unit, but also the academic freedom of the individuals in that unit, especially if they disagree with the content of a statement that their unit is considering putting out. So those are sort of the questions in terms of navigating this conflict, right? There's a few things that are discussed in the report here. Certainly writing with respect for others' views is important, that these things should be ones that come from a scholarly perspective on a topic and are not, and well, as it says here, right? We consider the views of others and write in a respectful way. In the procedure sort of notion, we really felt that units should have a process for doing this, that they should have some idea of this is how we write statements, or a unit may decide we don't write statements, right? But units should make these kinds of decisions of how they want to go about this, if they want to go about this, or they may decide that no, our department, our center, our unit, we do not want to engage in this, and we may have a policy that sort of indicates that. But fundamentally, the unit has the autonomy to make that kind of decision. When it comes to this issue of conflicting views between individuals and unit statements, right, certainly this is going to happen. And the question then is, how do we navigate that conflict? A few things were sort of proposed in the recommendations and discussed in the report. Most important, I think, is that it's a good idea to indicate who the statement is speaking for, right? To be clear that it's not speaking for the institution, indicate who it's speaking for. And so we felt that, if it's a collection of tenured professors writing this, tenured professors really have, the fullest protections of academic freedom on campus. So they're in the best position to engage in this sort of work. But we should indicate, what group it is that this is speaking for. On the other hand, or along with that, we felt that requiring signatures for these is quite problematic, right? And the reason for that is not to protect those who agree with the statement, it's to protect those who do not agree with the statement. If signatures are required, that means someone has to sign or not sign. We've heard stories of, pressure being put on people to potentially sign these things. And that's a problem. That gets into the space of compelled speech. And so the point of not requiring signatures is so that when someone disagrees, they're not required to, retain or not add their signature, and then it becomes known that they were someone who didn't support this thing. And that's where this pressure and possibilities of compelled speech come into play. So the point about this is it's to protect those who disagree with the viewpoint of the statement. In terms of dissemination, right, so there's some discussion here too, right? We felt that given the autonomy of units, they should be able to use their websites as they see fit, right? So they can make their decisions on how or if they post these sorts of things. right? It may be a good idea not to put it on the front page of your department's webpage. It might be a good idea to have a space where these are sort of put so it's clear what their intention is. But that's really for the unit to make those kinds of determinations. We heard a little bit about questions of ownership, right? We felt that ownership of websites by the university is a non-issue. The university owns the classes we teach in, the labs we do research in, the studios we create in. And ownership is not part of the equation when we talk about academic freedom there. And so it shouldn't be here either. There was some discussion of branding. There are branding policies that sort of require that the block M not be used if it can hurt the university's sort of image in an essence. But branding issues are not ones that should come before issues of academic freedom. So this came up in a few places, right? The 2011 white paper by this committee. This was in the times of the Troubled Waters film and this court case, Garcetti and Cabellos, right? And this sort of came up with what's written here is that it's the mission of the university is more important than protecting its image. And so that's something we felt that the branding stuff is not really relevant to what we mean here by dissemination. We had a little discussion. We had some discussion on institutional neutrality. This certainly was in the news a lot last spring. So there's many articles in the Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed. Essentially, we considered this and read a lot of these things and felt that it's not something that the university should adopt. It certainly is not something that should be imposed on faculty. It'd be one thing if faculty chose a path like this, but it's not something that should be imposed on them. So like a lot of these things, there's a lot of good ideas about what not to do when it comes to writing statements. But that doesn't mean that those good ideas, that good advice is something that should be encoded in a policy that sort of is meant to apply to everyone and every unit at the institution. Finally, the recommendations, right? So most of these are ones we've sort of discussed already. I think numbers 3 and 8 here, we haven't. These are sort of get to these questions of like, well, what if there's contention about a statement, right? What if a unit writes a document and feels that it's not actually a statement on matters of public concern and therefore doesn't require a disclaimer? Perhaps there it's okay for a provost or an academic officer to say, no, you need a disclaimer. The thing can be published, it can be on the website, but a disclaimer is something maybe that final decision could be left to the chief academic officer of the institution. Point 8, there was a question, we heard this in various venues of what if academic freedom is used as some sort of excuse to write something that is extremely problematic. And the majority of the committee felt that the autonomy of the unit is the paramount part here. But who would be allowed to sort of take down a statement, right? So the Office of General Counsel is responsible for that if it's not legal, if it's hate speech, but if it's controversial or problematic, who can do that? The Faculty Senate is sort of the least bad option there. Not many people think it's a good option. It's the least worst one of a group of people to look at a statement and say, no, this thing should not be allowed, that it doesn't earn the protections of academic freedom. So all these recommendations really flow out of the autonomy of a unit, out of the Board of Regents policy on academic freedom and responsibility, and out of this sort of outward looking view that we find inside of the mission. It's 3 and 8 that sort of don't quite follow that. These are ones that I would expect to be not used or maybe not even incorporated into a final policy. The last bit, right, we had some guidelines for producing statements. Frankly, we didn't have a lot of time to get into this. I think it'd be interesting to sort of like dive into this more deeply. But the real issue here is how do we sort of navigate this conflict and the pitfalls of writing these statements. This is an important thing. There's work to be done here. This committee would be eager. I won't speak for the committee. Some members might be eager to investigate this. Some maybe had enough in the spring on this topic. But there are some guidelines that are also part of this. So with that, I've probably talked more than I should. I'd be happy to take questions and discuss things. And then hopefully we can move to discussion about a vote. So.
Thank you, Professor Van Wyk. The floor is now open for discussion. If you have a question or comment, please raise your hand. I'll defer. Let's see. Please raise your hand. I'll work on calling on people here in the order. Will the staff unshare so that we can have discussion?
Oh, sorry, I will do that. I can do that.
Okay,
yes,
great. Thank you so much. I'll start with, and please address your questions to me as chair and not to the presenter. I believe that's our protocol, correct? I confer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just take a second to double check this.
We can start with we'll start with the first question. I'm trying to learn your protocols here for this particular culture. So, okay, so let's see.
Yeah, this is just discussion.
This is, which means.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, Ruth, with your first question for Eric.
Thank you very much, President Cunningham. I want to endorse this report. I have read it through very carefully. I just think it's a really excellent piece of work, and I heartily thank Eric and the committee. Clearly, this represents a tremendous amount of work on the part of the whole committee. And so I thank you all for the work you put into producing it. I want to highlight some things that I think it does very well. First, it provides a clear explanation for why academic freedom is available to units beyond just individuals. It connects us directly to the university's mission of outreach and public engagement, and ties this freedom to academic responsibility as well. So while the report is neutral on the issue of whether units should issue statements on matters of public concern, it is emphatic in its conclusion that a blanket ban on unit statements would violate academic freedom, and I strongly agree with that. Furthermore, this would undermine the mission of the university. After all, the freedom to speak on matters of public concern is consistent with the freedom of units to shape their curriculum and advertise talks on controversial issues and feature controversial research on a department webpage and so on.
30 seconds remaining.
Second, I think it's crucial the report makes clear recommendations for ensuring that minority viewpoints and untenured employees are protected when statements on matters of public concern are made. So I really urge you all to read it carefully. These are really thoughtful, practical, and ethical recommendations. So there is a lot of practical guidance in the report, and I consider it terrific that it gives a clear basis for academic freedom of our units and provides guidance on how we apply and express this freedom going forward. I think it deserves our full support. Thank you.
Elijah Cohen, and if I can remind people to state who you are and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Alicia Cohen. I'm the director of the School of Journalism and the College of Liberal Arts and a tenured full professor, which is why I'm pleased to see this report and how it seeks to preserve the most academic freedom with the least restrictive policy. I have a comment and then two questions related to the to some things I didn't see in the report. I I think it's easy to just take this report in the current context, but I just want to remind people during the pandemic, when people had very different feelings about coming back to campus with COVID. I remember I was chair of the Council of Chairs at the time in the College of Liberal Arts, and we decided to write a statement, and we sent it to the Daily, and we signed our names. And the reason we signed our names rather than saying a majority of chairs or whatever is because we were urging students to come back to campus. And not everyone signed on or not by it. And not signing the report was certainly not a sign that they disagreed. They just didn't sign. And so I do take issue with the idea that that a signature is always coercive or is better. I see a lot of associate professors concerned about esprit de corps for unanimity when their full professors are going to vote them for tenure. So with that in mind, also, I've never seen a minority opinion, and I really appreciated how the report talked about the importance of inviting that. And
30 seconds
other
remaining.
things. My two questions are, first, was there a consideration of requiring units or recommending that units have a minority opinion published when there isn't a unanimous statement? And then the second question was, is there a recommendation around having the procedures published? I think that would be important to the public to understand units' varying procedures for publishing this. Those were my two questions.
Eric,
Yeah, thanks for that. Right. I think, you know, this idea of that you touched on, right, of signing or not signing, our recommendations are really that the university policy not require signatures. Units may decide that they think signatures are a great idea and they want to do it. We don't tend to think that's a good idea, but that's something that really falls, in our opinion, on the autonomy of the unit to sort of do that, right? In terms of publishing the policy or procedure that a unit has, I think that makes sense. We didn't get into that as much. That sort of falls into the procedures of how to go about doing this. It's something that would make a lot of sense, right? I think having a disclaimer and perhaps a link to the procedures by which the unit makes these decisions. I can imagine a link to something written by the AF&T explaining what unit statements are and what they are not, so that that is clear. I think there's a lot of things that could be done there, but that's something that fell just outside of the timeline we had to get to. And I'm sorry, but your first question, I think I dropped that in my...
A recommendation, if you're going to have a majority opinion, to have a minority opinion, like in tenure, for example.
Yeah, no, we didn't have a discussion on that topic, right? So there's a sense that the unit may decide to do that, right? That they may decide we want to put minority opinions up as well. There's concerns about opening up the website as sort of a public forum, right? That if the unit, there's a sense that the unit votes, and we would hope that these things are done when they are, you know, if not unanimous, there's a quite strong majority in favor of something. That if that is the policy or the statement of the unit, then that's what the unit is saying. So that it doesn't sort of prevent people who disagree from speaking their mind and such, but we don't have any recommendations that that be required to then be put up on the unit's webpage. So.
And David Morrison, I'll remind people, in addition to introducing themselves, the staff is reminding me that questions in your protocol here are addressed to the chair, and then the chair invites whether there will be a response or not. I understand that that's your procedures here, so thank you for helping me follow that. David Morse.
Hi, my name is David Morse. I'm a faculty senator from College of Science and Engineering, Department of Chemical Engineering and Material Science. Actually, to make sure I understand the procedure, this is more of a comment than a question. Is that appropriate?
That's fine. Yep, please.
Okay. So I think I agree with the report regarding things that what should or shouldn't be required, and disagree in part about what is or isn't wise. So I certainly agree that that unit statements should be banned, that a ban would be too blunt an instrument. I guess my disagreement comes because I tend to think that that unit and institutional neutrality should be the default, except under exceptional circumstances. And I would have preferred that the statement came down closer to that. In saying that, I think it should, and also I think it should be the default, except when action is required. that is what I'm talking about when you're just issuing an opinion rather than taking some sort of collective action like setting a curriculum or hiring a faculty member. So I'm going to suggest 2 criteria for when it might make sense for a unit to, to issue an opinion about a matter of public concern. You should probably have near unanimity. There shouldn't be significant disagreement, or maybe you shouldn't be speaking as a unit. And the consensus that you have should be based on scholarly expertise of the members. You shouldn't be, if you're claiming someone's attention, it should be based on your specific expertise. If those 2 criterion aren't met, then I tend to think that the most appropriate alternative is a signed letter almost all of the time. And that I don't see, I was disappointed that you came down so strongly against signed letters. I don't think it's coercive. I think that when you have a faculty meeting and discuss whether or not a unit should do something, it becomes clear if people are opposed to it in any case. And that, that unless you have a strong opinion that's based on your scholarly expertise, you can make your opinions known as individuals simply by signing a letter. And I don't see any problem with that letter, with saying that you're doing this, you are all members of a particular department, or even linking it to the department webpage. But you should more strongly avoid speaking for people that disagree with you. And I did have one question. I think one of these statements that's based on a majority vote is a misuse of majority rule, that you should not
30
be making
seconds.
a statement like this based on 51%. Did you consider, as a matter of policy, suggesting or requiring a supermajority? And I think you should.
Thank you. And I think we have time potentially for both of these next 2 questions, and then we'll need to end. Eric Schwartz.
Thank you. I also, while I'm very sympathetic to the comments.
Please introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm sorry. Eric Schwartz. I'm a professor at the Humphrey School. But in general, I like the report. I read it. I like the call for transparency in terms of who is saying it, maybe not the individual names, but if it's not the entire unit, that's made clear. I support all of that. I have 3 questions, which I anticipate my colleagues at the Humphrey School are going to ask. Number 1, how are we defining units? Is it the university definition of academic unit? I think there would be some interest in that question and making it clear that we're not talking about things that might be like centers, but essentially groups, areas that have the same sort of authority that departments would have. My second question is, am I correct in inferring from the report that, or am I correct in understanding that the implication of the report is that administrators who essentially control websites, access to websites, should provide access for these kinds of statements that you think should be permitted, ought to be made, because a lot of access to websites is administratively controlled. And then I guess
30 seconds.
My third question is the implication of the report that if 60% of the department feels one way and 40% feels another way, then both groups should have access to the website, or only the first group should have access to the website? Those are the kind of hypotheticals I think I'm going to be asked when I brief this.
Thank you. And I think I'll look for the group to take those under questions for what things that they are all considering. And I'll move on to Tim Babe.
Thank you. It's Tim Beebe. I'm a faculty senator from the School of Public Health. And thank you, President Cunningham. A question I had was did the group ever discuss the relevance of motivations or intended purpose of these unit level statements, or at least how it might align with the unit's vision or mission?
Great. And I if it can be done in a short amount of time, Eric, do you want to provide a brief answer to that question, and then we'll move on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there have been a few questions, I guess. Only this last one you'd like me to answer? Or?
Correct. Yes, the other ones I think were considerations for you and the group to take under advisement in terms of next steps and thinking about things. This seems like a direct question, and I'm sorry if that seems inconsiderate to anybody. It's not the intention. I just want to make sure that we keep to the time because we have other agenda items.
So we didn't consider relevance or intent in statements, right? That we feel that a lot of this falls to the decision making of the unit. So we really felt that a lot of these things get left to the unit to make these kinds of decisions. You know, I mentioned a little bit about guidelines that we didn't have time to get into, right? We would, if I was to read the mind of the committee, I suspect that they would say, you know, if it's a 60-40 vote in favor of a controversial statement, then don't do it, right? That there's a lot of good reasons to avoid writing unit statements. And there's a lot of reasons to think very carefully about how to do it. So there's a lot of sort of hypothetical situations that I think could be quite problematic. But fundamentally, it's the autonomy of the unit. It's their freedom to make those decisions about how they want to do it. You know, the thing we really recommended was that they have a process, that they think ahead of time about how to go about doing this and what those things are going to, how they do it. And they could decide if it's not 90-10, we're not going to do it, right? That could be something a unit could decide to do to avoid these sorts of situations.
Let's see. We will now proceed to the motion on the floor. Amber, please initiate the poll.
Ten more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. With 60 ayes and 16 nays, that motion carries.
Item 7 is an update from the President's Task Force on Institutional Speech. I will call on Professor Phil Buhlman, Chair of the Task Force, to provide an update.
Thank you, President Cunningham. It's interesting to follow right after this. And so, first of all, what I would like to start with is just say that I want to thank the AF&T members for all their work on this report, because I really honestly believe that I doubt that anybody knows better than the President's Task Force members how much work AF&T has put into this report. I also want to emphasize that and thank all the senators. And frankly, I'll say that I am relieved that a large majority of you have endorsed the AF&T report. Frankly, anything else would have made my job and the job of the President's Task Force a lot harder, and I will explain shortly why. I know that some of you may wonder whether our task force will come up with a policy that differs significantly from the AF&T recommendations. I think there was a little bit kind of a question like that raised in the Senate floor just before. This is not what you're going to see. If the AF&T recommendations look to you like a chocolate cookie, then the policy that the task force will propose will look like a chocolate cookie too. And I have to admit, no, not every cookie is a perfect copy of one another. I mean, we've just heard some of the more critical questions on the floor to my colleague Eric. And I want to assure you that our task force has exactly thought about these issues. So we're trying to address them. Nevertheless, I would like to emphasize that the policy that we are going to propose, I feel we're pretty close to the end with that. I am confident that you will see that we are tracking the AF&T recommendations pretty closely, taking into account some of the careful, thoughtful concerns that have been voiced today. But so I want to give you a few examples of why I think we're that close, really, to the AF&T recommendations. The AF&T report recommends that academic units should be allowed to make statements in matters of public concern. Eric just pointed out there should be no ban. The task force agrees and will present a policy that allows members of academic units to make statements on matters of public concern. The AF&T report warns us that such statements must be carefully crafted to avoid harm. I just heard minutes ago Eric emphasizing the restraint that should be shown. The President's task force agrees with that wholeheartedly. Academic freedom of individuals, freedom of expressions must be protected. And we acknowledge a lot of the careful thinking that the AF&T report shows has that in mind. The AF&T report recommends that academic units should develop their own policies on public statements before crafting such a statement. And the task force agrees and will present a policy that asks academic units to develop their own policies on public statements before making statements. And just as my response to one of the senators before, asking whether those will be public, it is my understanding that based on federal law, Freedom of Information Act, those policies must be public. And also they're not meaningful. No policies that are not public are meaningful, in my opinion. The AF&T report advised against a need for signatures on statements, and the task force strongly agrees. There may be special situations when a group may wish to have signatures, but a requirement for signatures is not a good idea. That we agree with AF&T. We also just saw on Eric's slide the statement that whoever makes a statement should indicate for whom the statement speaks. The task force members, I'm sure, not only agree with this, they love this wording. Now, I'll be honest, granted, there are some differences between the recommendations from AF&T and the policies proposed by the President's task force. And arguably, one of the biggest differences is that the task force will also address statements by senior leadership of the university, including the president, chancellors, deans, and senior leaders. Now, this contrasts with the AF&T report, which really only commented about academic unit statements. But there's a very simple reason why the task force is different there. The simple reason is that the charge of the President's task force was different from what the AF&T report covered. We were specifically asked to think about institutional speech across the entire university at all levels. And we certainly do that. We're not shying away from that. I feel I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. It's almost, I feel like in the feeling of being an academic, I gave my abstract first. I do owe you a little bit more detail. At first, I would also comment on the task force membership, because I don't think that's probably sufficiently known. The task force comprises a majority of faculty members, many of them with significant faculty governance experience and department chair experience, but it also includes staff members and a student representative. It gives a broad representation of many different disciplines and point of views from all across our campuses. And so I want to illustrate that. And so I hope I don't bore anybody by actually quickly going through that list of members. There's, of course, first me, the task force chair. I have been past chair of the Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee. And I'm in the chemistry department. And for full disclosure, I do not have any administrative appointment. Then there is Christy Moran, also a past AF&T chair from Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. Mark B. in Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior, past chair of the Faculty Consultative Committee. Ron Krebs, professor of political science, was the past chair of the Senate Judicial Committee. Rob Jones, who is in the School of Dentistry, has been the co-chair of Faculty Advisory Committee on the Health Sciences. We have from Duluth, to really expand that view as well, Professor Lin Shu, who is co-chair of the Faculty Senate Duluth. There are more faculty. There is Jody Dworkin, who's a professor and extension specialist Family Social Science. There is Cheryl Lightfoot, Public Affairs, Humphrey School of Public Arts. Jody Gray is Associate University Librarian for Research. And maybe in that context, I may remind you, many probably don't know that, the Dean of the Libraries actually has tenure. There's Emilius White, Interim Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, really making sure that we are thinking about those aspects all the time as well. There's a student representative, Drew Schwartz, past president of the Council of Graduate Students. And then we also have 3 ex officio members on the task force who are helping us to get better idea on how this all affects also the students. So from the Office of Student Affairs, the Office of the General Counsel, as well as Chrissy Wells, Director of Internal Communications, which kind of helps us too to better understand how the university is seen from the outside. And I acknowledge Ann Barnes, who's been a wonderful assistant to me. Now, what about the scope of the work? I kind of already implied that's actually really expansive. And I'm trying not to repeat anything that was kind of implied already prior by the FCC chair. I want to emphasize that through our work, the task force really has appreciated the thoughtful work that AF&T has done. But in addition to what AF&T has done, we've also done considerable kind of consulting with various different perspectives. Now, some of that consultation is a direct follow-up on suggestions in the AF&T report. If you've read the AF&T report carefully, you'll see that it was suggested by AF&T that some additional consultation would be provided. But we also did additional consultation because the charge of a task force is more expensive than what AF&T has been focusing on, which is really academic unit statements. Now, let me briefly also comment on the challenges that we have been facing. On one hand, I will say that the timeline is a challenging one. What I have learned in this whole consultation too is that there's actually a lot of inquiries and a fair number of complaints that are coming to the university, mostly kind of to the president's office or to the foundation. Inquiries, many cases coming from the legislator. And so I do understand that when we were given the charge for our task force, that there was a desire that a policy really be in place when the legislature starts in next January. So for quite a while now, our task force really has been working in overdrive. We've been meeting every week with numerous meetings in between. So certainly kind of that time part is a challenging part. The task force is faced also by the typical challenges that any group that writes a policy really is facing. We can't only think about a typical department with faculty and maybe graduate students. We do have to think a little bit outside of the box. Where does the term unit, what does that really mean? And actually, I was really delighted that actually one of the senators brought that up before. How is the unit defined? So we have been trying to think too about P&A staff and graduate students. What about units with a few or only or no faculty at all in the system? For example, the Weizmann Museum or the Bell Museum or the libraries. And I think we can all agree that those also are contributing to our teaching mission. So should we exclude that from our definition of units or not? Can take away that actually the task force or other would prefer to include those. And the reason or the justification why the task force think that these units should be thought about as well, that justification I take directly from the AF&T white paper as presented in the December 2011 to the University Senate. That white paper said, the protections of academic freedom are extended to all university employees who engage in scholarly work. anyone of any employment status or rank who designs, creates, or discovers content as part of their university employment enjoys the protection of academic freedom. That includes professors, museum directors, artists, etc. End of citation. So you will understand that the task force felt really the need that there's considerable need for consultation even before starting a policy. And so that's what we've really done in kind of the second half of this summer quite extensively. And I just quickly want to give you an overview of all the people that we've actually talked to because we feel that there should be input from them. We've talked to a number of students from the Arab Student Association, the Muslim Student Association just in Palestine, but also the Minnesota Hillel, Jewish campus organization. Nathan Paradise, Director, Center of Jewish Studies, who has been Director of Undergrad Studies and really has a good idea of the pulse. We talked to the Bias Response and Referral Network, which told us about what types of complaints are coming into the Bern in the context of statements. And kind of interesting to see, there was actually very few reactions to departmental statements, but certainly a fair number of feedback that is coming in response to statements from, actually in the past, the interim university presidents, or prior to that, prior presidents. We talked to University of Minnesota healthcare professionals because we felt that there's a lot of patients who are treated at the university, and we wanted to know what sort of impact that might have on those patients. So I'm not going to give you the whole list, but that includes, for example, the Associate Dean of Native American Health, Professor Jennifer Needle, Center of Bioethics and in Departmental of Pediatrics. What we certainly heard from them is that we ought to be thoughtful about the perceptions of patients, especially as patients with minority backgrounds. Now, we've also specifically been asked by AF&T to talk to department heads, and we've done that. And actually, it's been really delightful to talk to a number of department heads who either are in departments that have made past statements or who have discussed statements, but it ended up deciding not to make statements. That was very, very insightful. And we certainly listened to what they thought when we shared with them what we thought might actually come out of our work on the policy. And a lot that, as I mentioned before, that really reflects very much what the AF&T report has been saying as well. So I know I'm kind of approaching the end of the time that I've been allotted, so I will just point out is, yes, so some of the last topics that we're still working on, which are challenging, is who are the members of a unit. And, you know, I've just noted down when Eric was talking before, I was already delighted that he pointed out, yeah, that it's important that we say from whom a statement is coming. What about units with academic missions, with an academic mission, but not very many tenured faculty? I think we kind of addressed that a little bit just before. But then also we're kind of thinking, how would this affect unionized members of a unit? Not entirely obvious. So I will end up my update here by just simply emphasizing that our discussion, or this discussion today in the Senate was very, very helpful. I wrote down notes, but I'm also very pleased to really see that we haven't really come up to too many things that the task force hasn't thought about. If anyone wants to reach out to me or to the task force, please do so. We welcome your input. And I do expect that we will be handing our report next month to the president. And I'm sure, I know there will be consultation beyond that, and we're willing to listen. So back to you, President Cunningham.
Thank you so much, Phil, and much thanks to the task force as well as to the thoughtful work and engagement of the AF&T committee on the prior comments before. I know we're a bit over time, but I do want to offer Phil the opportunity to answer any questions or comments if there's any for him regarding his presentation. Okay, seeing none, thank you so much. Item 8 concerns old business. There is no old business for the Faculty Senate. Item 9 concerns new business for the Faculty Senate. Please note that any new business will be referred to the committee unless special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there any new business? Hearing and seeing none, is there a motion for adjournment?
Motion for
adjournment. A second? Wonderful. Amber, please initiate the poll.
A few more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. With 67 ayes and 0 nays, that motion carries.
Thank you so much. We are adjourned.